I didn't raise my voice. I didn't send a single text. I just sat in my truck in the parking lot of that wedding venue, windows fogged from the cold, and I let the quiet settle over me like it always does when I've already made up my mind. My daughter got married on a Saturday in October. The leaves were turning. The kind of day you'd want for a wedding if you spent your whole life dreaming one up. And I had spent 62 years on this earth, 31 of them raising her, making sure she had every reason to stand in a place like that and feel proud. I was not proud that day, but I smiled. I always smile. Her name is Vivienne. She goes by Vivi now, which started sometime around when she met her husband, a man named Clifton who sells commercial real estate and has opinions about wine that he did not have before he started making money. I have nothing against Clifton personally. He works hard. He keeps his lawn neat. He just never looked at me the way a man looks at his father-in-law. He looked at me the way you look at old furniture you inherited and haven't figured out what to do with yet. Viv and I used to be close. When she was small, she called me Papa, and she meant it the way children mean things, completely, without conditions. She used to fall asleep on my chest watching television. She used to call me from college, just to talk, not about anything important, just to hear a familiar voice. I kept every one of those voicemails for years. I still have them somewhere on an old phone in my sock drawer. Somewhere between college and Clifton and the promotions and the new neighborhood, she started pulling away in the slow, barely noticeable way. That's worse than a sudden break. You don't see it happening. You just look up one day and realize the distance has already been built and the foundation has been set for a while. I retired 3 years ago from 30 years with the county road department. Not glamorous work. I wore a high visibility vest and I knew every pothole on every back road in our county, and I came home tired most evenings. But I owned my house outright. I had savings. I had a pension. And when Viv got engaged, I offered to help with the wedding because that is what fathers do. That is what I have always done. The number we agreed on was $40,000. I want to say that plainly, not to be impressive, but because it matters to what comes later. $40,000. I wrote the first check the same week they got back from their engagement trip to Portugal. I wrote the second one 4 months later. Every dollar came from an account I'd been adding to since Viv was 12 years old. A little each month. A habit I built because I grew up without much and I wanted her to have a soft landing whenever life needed one. I did not ask for recognition. I did not ask to be involved in every decision. I picked out my suit in August, a dark charcoal gray I bought at a department store downtown, had it pressed twice. I got a haircut the Thursday before. I shined my shoes the night before the wedding, sitting at the kitchen table with a cloth and a tin of polish, the way my own father taught me. I arrived at the venue an hour early, the way I always do for things that matter. The coordinator, a young woman with a clipboard, found my name on the seating chart and walked me to my table with a smile that was professional and nothing else. The table was near the back of the reception hall, next to the door that led to the kitchen. Table 11. I counted the tables between mine and the head table where Viv and Clifton would be sitting. There were 10 of them. I sat down. I smoothed my jacket. I looked around. The tables closer to the front were filling up with Clifton's family, his colleagues, his golf friends, neighbors from their new neighborhood, people I recognized from their social media pages because that is the only place I had ever seen them, people Viv had known for 2 or 3 years, people who had not driven her to the emergency room at 2 in the morning when she was 17, people who had not sat with her through finals week with a pot of coffee between them, people who had not written $40,000 worth of checks so she could have table linens that matched the centerpieces. One of Clifton's aunts was seated at table 2. She breeds show dogs. I know because I spent 20 minutes talking to her at the rehearsal dinner the night before, trying to be warm, trying to be part of something. I was at table 11, next to the kitchen door. The ceremony was beautiful. I was give it that. The light through the chapel windows was golden and Viv looked the way every father hopes his daughter looks on the day she gets married. Like she is standing exactly where she belongs. I cried a little during the processional. I'm not too old to admit that. I pressed my thumb against the corner of my eye and looked at the ceiling and breathed to it. I sat in the third pew, not the first. The mothers were in the first pew. I understood that, mostly. What I didn't understand came later. After the ceremony, when the photographer was gathering family for portraits, Clifton's mother organized everyone efficiently the way she organizes everything. She had a vision. Grandparents here, siblings there, immediate family closest to the couple. The photographer called for immediate family, I stepped forward. Clifton's mother glanced at me briefly, then continued adjusting people's positions without saying anything directly. I stood where I'd moved to. A beat passed. Viv looked at me. And then she looked away. And she didn't say anything either. The photographer took the photo. I was not in it. I stood there for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to understand clearly what had just happened. Not a misunderstanding, not a scheduling oversight, not a miscommunication. Then I excused myself to find the restroom, and I took the long way around. I sat at table 11 through the cocktail hour and through dinner. A man named Dwight sat next to me, a distant cousin of Clifton's who had driven up from Tennessee and seemed just as uncertain about why he was at table 11 as I was. We talked about the drive, about the weather, about football. He was a decent man. I was glad he was there. Viv made her rounds during dinner with Clifton beside her, thanking people, hugging people, the natural choreography of a bride moving through her own reception. She reached our table last. She hugged me quickly, the way you hug someone at a crowded event when you're running behind, and she said, "You look great, Dad," and moved on. I smiled. I always smile. But something in me had already gone quiet and still in the way it does before a decision forms completely. I drove home that night, instead of staying at the hotel block I had originally booked. It's a 90-minute drive. I did it in the dark with the radio off, thinking clearly the entire way. I want to explain something about how I make decisions. I don't make them angry. Anger is loud and wastes energy and makes you do things you have to apologize for. I make decisions when I am calm, when I have let the emotions settle like silt in still water and I can see the bottom clearly. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was past midnight. I sat in the truck for a few minutes looking at my house. The house where Viv grew up, where her handprints are still faintly visible on the doorframe in the hallway because I could never bring myself to paint over them. Then I went inside and opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account. I pulled up the scheduled transfers. Viv and I had set up an arrangement earlier in the year, before the wedding, before things shifted in the ways they shifted. A monthly transfer of $1,200 to help them with the down payment savings on a larger house they were planning to buy in the spring. I had set it up happily, in the same spirit I'd written every check, because I had the means and she was my daughter, and that is what I do. The cursor hovered over the cancel button for about 3 seconds. I clicked it. The confirmation message appeared. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer?" I clicked yes. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. I slept deeply, the way I haven't slept in months. I slept deeply, the way I haven't slept in months. I didn't call her. I didn't send an explanation. I didn't need her to know right away. What I needed was to have made the decision clearly and quietly, and I had. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, I did something I hadn't done in a while. I called my granddaughter, this daughter from a short first marriage that ended before Clifton, a girl named Addie who is 9 years old and has my mother's eyes. Addie lives with Viv and Clifton primarily, but I have her every other weekend and 1 month in the summer, and those weeks are the best weeks of my year. Addie had been at the wedding. She had sat at table 11 with me. She'd colored on the back of the menu and shown me her drawings and leaned against my arm during the speeches. She had not noticed the politics of the seating chart. She had just been glad I was there. I called her on Sunday afternoon, and we talked for 40 minutes about her teacher, about a book she was reading, about whether it was possible for a dog to understand jokes. She asked if we were still on for our weekend. I told her absolutely. She said good, because she had been working on a card for me and she didn't want it to go to waste. I hung up the phone and sat on the back porch for a while. The following week, I got a call from Viv. I let it go to voicemail. The message was careful, measured, the way she speaks when she's approaching something difficult. She said she was just checking in, that she hoped I was doing well, that they had gotten back the wedding photos and they were beautiful. She said she would send me some. I listened to the message twice. Then I set the phone down and went to start dinner. The month-end statement came. The transfer did not process. Whatever conversations happened on their end about that, I was not part of them. The second call came on a Tuesday morning. This time I answered. She said they had noticed the transfer hadn't come through. She asked if everything was okay, if there had been an issue with the account. I told her the account was fine. Silence. She asked if I had cancelled it. I told her yes. More silence. A long one. The kind that has weight to it. Then she asked why. I told her I had been thinking about it since the wedding, that I had sat at table 11 next to the kitchen door, that I had stepped forward for the family photograph and she had looked away, that she had hugged me the way you hug an acquaintance and thanked me for coming to her wedding. Her wedding that I had paid $40,000 toward and then moved on to the next table. I told her I was not angry. I was being precise. I wanted her to understand exactly what I had seen and what I had felt and what I had decided, without drama, without blame, without the kind of scene that neither of us would recover from cleanly. She started to say something about the photographer, about how things were rushed, about how Clifton's mother had been coordinating and it wasn't intentional. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said, "Viv, I shined my shoes the night before your wedding." She got quiet again. I told her I wasn't ending our relationship. I wasn't making any permanent declarations. I was just adjusting the financial arrangement to reflect the current reality of where things stood. And I hoped that someday she would understand that what I was doing was not punishing her. It was protecting what was left of my dignity, quietly, without asking anyone else to validate it. She cried a little. I heard it in her voice. I told her I loved her. I meant it. I have never stopped meaning it. We hung up. The following month, Clifton called. I expected that. He is not a man who lets things be handled without his involvement. He was polite, more polite than I expected, and he asked if there was a way we could meet and talk through some things. I said I was open to that. We met at a diner outside of town, mid-morning on a Wednesday, the kind of quiet hour when places like that are mostly empty. He was already there when I arrived. He stood up when he saw me, which I noticed. He bought the coffee. He did not say much at first. He looked like a man who had prepared something and then reconsidered it on the drive over. He told me he was sorry about the seating, that it had been handled poorly and he should have been more involved in making sure I was placed appropriately. He said the photograph situation was something he didn't know had happened until Viv told him afterward, and that he wished he had seen it in the moment because he would have said something. I told him I appreciated him saying that. He asked about the house fund, the monthly transfers. I told him honestly that the money wasn't the point, that I had set that up as a gesture from a place of wanting to be part of their lives in a real way, that when I felt I wasn't, continuing the gesture didn't make much sense. He nodded slowly. He stirred his coffee. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "My dad's been gone for 6 years. I'd give a lot to have a problem like this one." He said it quietly, looking at the table, not at me. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit there between us, the way things need to sit sometimes. Eventually, I told him I hoped we could find our way to something better, that I wasn't a man who held things permanently, that my door had never been locked, it had just gotten harder to find. He nodded again. We shook hands when we left. The next weekend, I had Addie. We raked leaves in the backyard and made a pile big enough that she could jump into it 3 times before it flattened out. She found a caterpillar on the fence post and named it Gerald before setting it free in the garden because, she explained, it deserved to be wild. She slept over Saturday night. In the morning, I made pancakes the way my mother used to, with blueberries pressed into the batter before flipping. Addie sat at the kitchen counter on the tall stool that has been in this kitchen longer than she has been alive, and she told me that her mom had seemed sad lately. I said sometimes grown-ups get sad for reasons that work themselves out. She thought about that. Then she said, "Are you sad, Papa?" I told her no. That I was okay. That I was exactly where I wanted to be, in my kitchen on a Sunday morning making blueberry pancakes for the person who liked them most. She seemed satisfied with that. She gave me the card before she left. She had made it herself, construction paper folded in half with crayon drawings on the front, me and her in the backyard, stick figures with yellow sun overhead. Inside she had written, in the careful large letters of a 9-year-old, "You are my favorite person and I hope you know that." I put it on the refrigerator with the same magnet that used to hold Viv's school drawings 30 years ago. 3 months after the wedding, Viv called on a Sunday evening. She did not start by talking about money or transfers or anything practical. She started by asking if she could come see me. She drove out alone, without Clifton, which told me she had something to say that she wanted to say herself. We sat on the back porch with coffee, same as I used to sit with her when she was in high school and had things she needed to say out loud to someone who wouldn't repeat them. She talked for a while, about how the last year had been more stressful than she let on, about how Clifton's world had absorbed her in ways she hadn't fully realized until she looked back, about how she had let certain things drift, certain people drift, without understanding the cost of that until the drift had become a gap. She didn't ask me to forgive her. She's smarter than that. She knows that the kind of thing I'm talking about doesn't get fixed with an apology. It gets fixed with time and with different choices made going forward. But she looked at me on that porch, the way she used to look at me when she was small, and she'd made a mistake, and she knew it, and she was showing me that she knew it without needing to dress it up in anything fancy. I told her that I had her handprints on my hallway door frame, and I'd never been able to paint over them. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I remember doing that." I said, "I know." We sat there until the light went and the temperature dropped, and I went in to get a second jacket for her. Because she always runs cold, always has, and she thanked me the way she used to. Not like a pleasantry, but like she meant the weight of it. I don't know what the next year looks like. I have never been a man who plans too far ahead. I know that Addie will be here next weekend, and we have agreed we are going to start a birdhouse kit I found at the hardware store. I know that Riv and I have a phone call scheduled for Thursday evening, something we haven't done regularly in years. I know that the handprints are still on the door frame, and I still cannot bring myself to paint over them. I know that when I clicked that cancel button on a quiet night in October, it was not cruelty. It was not revenge. It was a man who had spent 62 years keeping his word to everyone else, deciding that it was time finally to keep it to himself too. I shined my shoes for that wedding, and I have not stopped being her father for a single day of my life. Not because she has always made it easy, but because that is the kind of man I decided to be a long time ago, and I see no reason to become someone else now. That is the whole story. And I am still here. I have been thinking about what I would say at the end of this, and the honest answer is that I don't have a speech prepared. I never do. That's not how I was built. What I know is this. The things we do quietly, without an audience, without applause, without anyone watching, those are the things that define what we actually are. Not what we say at dinner parties, not the version of ourselves we curate for other people's comfort. The real thing, the version that sits alone in a truck at midnight and decides who it's going to be. I spent 31 years being Vivian's father the best way I knew how. I wasn't perfect. No father is. But I showed up. I wrote the checks. I drove the late-night emergency runs. I shined my shoes. And for a long time I told myself that the showing up was enough. That the actions would speak without me having to say a word. What I didn't understand until that October night in my driveway was that silence has a cost too. That absorbing things quietly, year after year, without naming them, without drawing a single line, teaches people something you never intended to teach. It teaches them that there is no line. When I cancelled that transfer, I wasn't punishing my daughter. I want to be clear about that. For anyone who has been in a similar place and is wondering if what they're feeling is cruelty or dignity, there is a difference. Punishment is designed to hurt someone. What I did was designed to tell the truth, to make a reality visible that had been invisible for too long. The reality that generosity without self-respect is not generosity. It's just slow erosion. Vivian is a good person underneath the distance that had grown between us. I believe that. Clifton sitting across from me in that diner, stirring his coffee, saying he'd give anything to still have his father around. That told me something real about the man my daughter chose. People are complicated. They get pulled into versions of themselves that they didn't plan for. The measure of a person isn't whether they drift, it's whether they find their way back. Addie named a caterpillar Gerald and set it free because it deserved to be wild. She's 9 years old and she already understands something that takes most of us decades to learn. That the right thing and the kind thing are often the same thing, and neither one requires an audience. I put her card on the refrigerator. I look at it every morning. What I want anyone watching this to take away is not a lesson about money or weddings or seating charts. It's simpler than all of that. It's that the way you treat the people who have always been there for you, quietly, unglamorously, consistently, says everything about who you are becoming. And the people who have always been there for you are watching, not to judge, not to retaliate, just to understand finally and clearly where they actually stand. Once you understand where you stand, you can decide what to do with that information. That's not hardness, that's wisdom. And wisdom, in my experience, is just pain that you sat with long enough to learn something from. I am still her father. I am still here. I always will be. But I shined my shoes for that wedding. And I will not pretend that didn't mean something.